An ocean of souls. The pallid land. I no longer call it urban exploration. It's an act of prying, a morbid fascination with the precise moment of abandonment. I seek the places where the human echo still clings to the dust, where things were simply left. The adrenaline is secondary now, what remains is a kind of sacrilege, documenting the ghosts of places for my own private chronicle. In the autumn of 2021, the winding, forgotten roads near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, drew me in. I was chasing the silent majesty of skeletal barns and bridges draped in ivy, driven by an instinct that was half direction, half drift. It was late afternoon, the light already thinning to a bruised gold, when I found it, a red barn, set far back from the cracked asphalt, swallowed by a tide of tall grass and tenacious thistles. The immense wooden door was ajar, a black aperture just wide enough for a shoulder. It possessed the profound stillness of an untouched crypt. I pulled my vehicle into the overgrown verge, the engine ticking as it cooled, a sound suddenly too loud. Clutching my camera and a flashlight, I crossed the field, the seat heads whispering a brittle counterpoint against my knees. 5 minutes, I imposed the rule like a prophylactic charm. In, document, out. I eased the door wider. The interior air was heavy, warm, and utterly dead. I raised the camera, the lens a dark eye to the gloom, took a quick, blind exposure, and then stepped forward, my foot meeting the floor. It didn't sound like wood. It crunched. I froze, the small, mechanical sound of my own breath suddenly dominating the silence. I swung the flashlight beam down and the world tilted. The floor was a seamless, suffocating carpet of shoes. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, piled and spread to the very edges of the space. They were every kind imaginable, children's diminutive sneakers, heavy work boots, elegant heels, house slippers, all caked in ancient mud, waterlogged, some faintly charred at the edges. Every distinct color had bled out, settling into a singular, desolate shade of grayish-brown. Then the smell rolled over me, wet, rotting leather, a suffocating mildew, and a faint, sour chemical tang, like old, decaying rubber. The brittle, snapping sound accompanying my every hesitant shift of weight was sickeningly suggestive, as though I were treading on delicate, long-dried bones. Through the camera's viewfinder, the scene transformed into a grotesque beauty, an ocean of shoes, bathed in a single, slanting beam of exterior light that turned the mounds briefly, falsely, golden. It was deeply wrong. It felt like stumbling into a vast, private catastrophe, a memory I had no right to witness. I'd seen the bizarre before, decayed hospitals, homes frozen in time, but this felt elemental, a deeply unsettling deposit of absence. The sheer volume of tiny shoes was what finally broke the spell of morbid awe. Infant Velcro straps, bright pink sandals that had long lost their luster, soles that should have glowed but were now dull and silent. I knelt, the stench spiking, and quickly framed a few shots. I picked up a small, pink sandal, the kind a toddler would wear. The strap was curled, the buckle seized with rust. I flipped it. The tread still held dried, ancient mud. For a fleeting, stomach-lurching instant, the image of the small, heedless foot that had worn it flared in my mind. I violently suppressed it. People dump strange things. It means nothing. The clapping dark. I moved deeper inside, each soft crunch underfoot a violation. And then, a sound that should not have been. Footsteps. Slow. Soft. A gentle drag and crunch, distinct from my own, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, holding my breath until my lungs ached. The sound ceased, too. A perfect, agonizing synchronicity. Hello. My voice was a brittle shard in the oppressive stillness. Silence. Only the thudding of blood in my ears. I turned slowly, sweeping the tight beam of light across the mounds of silent footwear. Nothing. No movement, no shadows elongating. The wind, I reasoned, though the air inside was thick and stagnant. The moment I took a single, cautious step, the great door slammed shut. The sound was a cannon shot, a sickening clap that rattled the very bones of the structure and plunged the interior into absolute, smothering darkness. I stumbled back, my throat closing around a panicked gasp. "Hey!" I roared, the sound instantly swallowed. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, faintly, the unmistakable shuffle resumed. Footsteps. Moving through the shoes, not toward me, but paralleling the wall, closing the distance. I swung the flashlight wildly, the beam catching only the empty middle distance. "Look," I tried to make my voice level, "I'm leaving. Just open the door." No answer. Another, deliberate step. The light in my hand began to tremble. I felt the pressure of a gaze, heavy and absolute, fixed upon me from an unseen corner. I spun toward the door, shoving my weight against it. Locked. Not jammed, but latched, barred from the outside. I hurled my shoulder against the aged wood once, twice. It held, immovable. My breath caught, tasting of dust and fear. "Please," I begged, the word a rasp. "I just want to leave." From the absolute dark of a far corner, a low, dull thud. Something landed right next to me. The crunch was louder than a shoe falling naturally. It had been thrown. That was the ignition. I hammered the door with everything I had left. A sickening crack, the latch splintering. I burst out, stumbling into the tall, twilight field, running until the air in my lungs was fire and the barn was a dark, distant silhouette. Then I stopped, forcing myself to turn. The door was open again, just a sliver. And in the black void of the doorway, someone was standing. A silent, static shape, a featureless outline framed by the last, dying light. I couldn't discern a face, only a profound, watchful presence. For a frozen second, I expected it to step out, to cross the threshold. But it simply stood. I dove into my car, the locks clicking home with a frantic finality before the key ever met the ignition. The headlights sliced across the barn as I spun the vehicle around. The figure was gone. But the door remained open. The unbroken pattern. For days, I kept the silence. The experience was a splinter in my mind, refusing to be smoothed over by logic. The external latch. The door slamming when I was the only one inside. Every attempt to impose a rational narrative collapsed. All that remained was the crushing, haunting image of the shoes. A week later, the irresistible, pathological need for closure drew me back. It was a crystalline morning, the sun harsh and unapologetic. I slowed the car as I neared the spot, my chest tight. I didn't exit the vehicle. I sat there, the engine purring a false sense of security, staring at the impassive, sun-drenched red wall. Eventually, I pressed the accelerator. I haven't returned to Lancaster, nor have I dared enter another derelict structure. Every night, the memory returns, the thunder of the door, the soft, deliberate footsteps following me through the dark. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if that latch hadn't broken. If the presence in the dark had taken one more step. I tell myself it was a local prank. That lie is a necessary fiction for sleep. Yet, before I manage to truly rest, I check the lock twice. Because in the absolute stillness of my apartment, when the world outside has faded, I can still hear it. The slow, rhythmic shuffle, the sound of someone walking across an endless field of shoes, stopping directly outside my door. The hour of protocol. Consistent incandescence. For years, the Sacramento nights have been my landscape, the sterile glow of scattered signage, the vast, echoing silence between the husks of warehouses long past their use. One, at the junction of 4th and Grove, always held my attention. Condemned. The chain-link perimeter sagged inward, windows were opaque with grime, and the orange, unsafe notice was half obliterated by time. But every night, with a disquieting precision, around 2 a.m. a single, upstairs window would light up. A clean, white rectangle of illumination against the heavy velvet of the dark. The first time, I dismissed it, a reflection. The second night, the same window. After a week of this impossible consistency, the pattern became an irritant. Nothing about a truly abandoned place should be so punctual. One night, I parked across the street, engine idling, and waited. At 2:02 a.m., the window snapped on. Sharp. Definite. It held until 2:42 a.m. when the light vanished as cleanly as it had appeared. This precision triggered a lapse in judgment. I needed to understand the why. The following night, I killed the engine and crossed the street. A section of the fence had been discreetly pulled back and secured with new wire, a recent passage. The side door gave way with a grunt of resistance, the old paint peeling off the metal like desiccated skin. I swept my light across a corridor of faded safety warnings and shattered vending machines. The floor was coated in a fine, white industrial dust, but it was not empty. There were footprints. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, overlapping and crisscrossing, all heading into the core of the building. The light I'd seen was leaking from the main central room. Inside, a single, bare bulb swung on a long cord. Beneath it, 12 folding chairs were arranged in a perfect circle. Beside each chair, a paper coffee cup sat on the floor. The liquid wasn't steaming, but when I held my hand over one, the coffee was noticeably warm, fresh enough to have been poured within the last 20 minutes. My beam tracked across the surrounding walls. They were lined with engineering blueprints, taped up, showing floor plans and layouts. Every identifying label, every number, had been meticulously covered with neat strips of black tape. I backed toward the wall, heart accelerating with a mounting sense of trespass. My light caught the edge of one obscured label. Beneath the tape, scrawled in faint pencil, were 3 numbers, 2:02, 2:12, 2:24. The exact window of time I'd been recording. The casual confidence of that handwriting, the knowledge it implied, the sense that my pattern had been tracked from the inside, felt like a physical touch beneath my skin. I should have fled. I was turning toward the door when a voice, low and devoid of inflection, fell into the silence directly behind me. Not tonight. 2 words. No anger, no explicit threat. Just chilling certainty. I froze, locked in place. The single bulb in the room flickered once, violently. That was the only warning I needed. I bolted. The flashlight beam swung in a wild arc. I struck the door with my shoulder, stumbled into the cool night air, and sprinted for the van. My keys nearly slipped from my numb fingers, but the engine caught on the second, desperate turn. When I risked a glance back, the upstairs window was dark again. The lot was profoundly still. The coiled hum. I drove until the anonymity of a freeway overpass offered cover, the van idling, the only sound the ragged in and out of my own breathing. That kind of fear can't be explained. It's not a scream, it's a cold, humming weight in the center of the chest. When the shaking finally subsided, I called the non-emergency line. Trespassers in a condemned building. The dispatcher was flatly indifferent. We'll send a car when available. They didn't. The next night, I was back, defeated by my own compulsion, but I stayed outside. At 2:02 a.m., the light returned like a clockwork apparition. 10 minutes later, it was dark. No patrol car. No sirens. I tried to convince myself of squatters or crews, but the warm coffee always invalidated the rationalization. A week later, I cornered a night clerk at a nearby gas station. Had he noticed anything? He shrugged. Old building. Sometimes guys park back there for training. They pay cash for snacks and coffee. Training? I pressed. He nodded. Not police. Not construction. Guys in plain clothes. Always around 2 in the morning. It provided a veneer of normalcy, a story I could use. That was the last night I took that route. I checked with the precinct. The officer glanced at his monitor. Patrol drove by. Nothing disturbed. Probably squatters. 2 days later, the city posted a fresh, crisp, unsafe structure notice across the front door. New date. New signature. It felt like a deliberate, conscious reaction to being seen. Now, I avoid that part of the city. But sometimes, when traffic bottlenecks on the highway, and you glance at the exact, specific angle, you can swear that behind the newly boarded up windows, there is a faint, stubborn white glow. I don't know who or what was in there, cultists, contractors, or something colder. What I know now is this: curiosity is not harmless. It is an invitation. If a place lights up on its own, you don't go in to find out why. You allow it to keep it secret, and you keep driving. The patient breath. Mechanism of decay. My trade is mechanics, my hobby is chasing the past. I don't seek ghosts, I document the decay, the dust mote still suspended in outdated sockets, the way morning light stubbornly finds its way through structural collapse. I view every abandoned space as a complex machine that has simply ceased to function. Gary, Indiana, is perfect for this: dozens of forgotten houses, their bones still upright, hollowed out by time. In the late summer of 2019, I chose a house that was visually unremarkable: sagging porch, ivy, no warning signs. I parked discreetly, secured the camera to my chest, and let myself in through the gaping front door. The air inside was a suffocating blend of wet drywall and the phantom scent of forgotten paper. Dust drifted in the slanting light like ash-colored snow. My boots ground over the debris, a sound like coarse sandpaper. Then, emerging from the profound silence, came a low, rising hum. Not a creak of stress, nor the knock of a pipe, but something mechanical, deep enough to register in the soles of my feet. I tracked it through the kitchen, down a narrow door that grated halfway open. The air grew cooler, the hum louder. In the basement corner sat a large, contractor-grade generator, running with a quiet, efficient smoothness. A fresh gasoline can sat beside it, its cap still wet. Someone had hung a moving blanket nearby, a makeshift muffler. A sealed foam tube vented the exhaust through a wall pipe to the outside. This was too efficient, too deliberate for casual trespass. An orange extension cord snaked up through the ceiling toward the kitchen. Boot prints, not sneakers, were tracked across the dust. You don't leave a generator running in an abandoned house for years, I murmured into the GoPro. Logic screamed retreat. Curiosity, a far older impulse, compelled me forward. I followed the cord. It disappeared behind the refrigerator. The hum was an oppressive drone in the thin walls. I gripped the handle and pulled. The fridge door opened with a slight, disturbing suction sound. Inside, a single bulb glowed, clean and bright. On the top shelf, 3 glass jars, meticulously labeled in black marker, left hand. Teeth. June 12th. On the lower shelf, a takeout container with initials and a date. A folded paper bag secured with a hairband. A single boiled egg sat in a small cup. My mind scrambled to impose a safe explanation: medical samples, taxidermy, anything mundane. Then, the hum died. The quiet invitation. I stood absolutely still. The resulting silence was profound, physical, as if the air itself had solidified around me. The generator was either out of fuel, or someone had just turned it off. I eased the fridge door closed. My pulse ticked against my carotid artery, yet my movements remained slow, measured. Then, a faint creak from the floorboards above. A single, distinct step. Human weight. I extinguished my flashlight and waited, a column of frozen fear. The sound paused, too, a silent acknowledgement that I had been heard. I backed toward the front door, my voice a strained whisper into the GoPro: someone's upstairs. Another step answered me. Then, something worse, breathing, soft and slow, directly above where I stood. That was the limit. I bolted, ignoring the camera, the angles, the narrative. I sprinted across the floor and out the door, the sunlight blinding and almost painful in its sudden intensity. I reached the curb, started the engine, and drove 1 block before I realized I hadn't taken a full breath since the breathing began. I pulled over, my hands shaking violently on the wheel. No one followed. The house stood silent, the faded boards watching like shut eyes. I called the non-emergency line, twisting the truth, a vacant property. Running generator. Signs of occupation. We'll send a unit when one is free. That night, I reviewed the audio. The generator's steady hum. Right before the engine cut, there was a new sound, soft and close to the microphone. A breath. Low, slow, distinctly human. Exactly 1 second before the power died. I replayed it half a dozen times. Not an echo. Not interference. Someone had exhaled right behind me. A week later, the patrol officer called. No one inside. Generator gone. Basement empty. You sure it was that house? I didn't explore alone for a long time after that. The memory of that setup, the foam muffler, the sealed exhaust, the organized, labeled contents, refused to fade. Not a teenager, not a squatter. Someone organized enough to label jars and seal the room from gas fumes. I tell myself those jars held medical specimens. But the breath on the recording wasn't panic. It wasn't the sound of someone caught. It sounded patient. A calm exhale, precisely before the noise that had masked my presence was removed. It sounded like whoever it was wanted to listen. I didn't post the footage. I have a folder for the never uploadable, places that feel wrong instead of empty. The generator house sits at the top. Months later, a friend forwarded a news link, small house fire on the west side of Gary. No injuries. Cause unknown. The photo showed the porch railing. The windows were gone. I didn't ask questions. Every hobby has a line you cross without knowing it. That day was mine. Abandoned is a word used by outsiders. Inside, sometimes, a hum under the floor isn't leftover electricity. It's a warning. And if it ever goes quiet while you are still inside, leave. The stillness of the audience. An unsettling My compulsion is for the skeletal remains of Americana, the rusted gas pumps and the chipped diner tiles. On a solo drive through the Southwest, chasing the ghost of Route 66, Barstow, California, was a planned brief stop. I saw it by accident, a faded sign reading Vista Motel, most of the letters peeled away, leaving only a stark, single A. The lot was deserted, guarded by sagebrush and wind-whipped sand. The building was the archetype of desert decay, sun-bleached stucco, tattered curtains, a drained pool framed by cracked lounge chairs. Perfect for the drone. I launched the machine. Through the screen, the motel was still and heat-hazed. 30 seconds into the flight, I noticed movement. At the edge of the pool, there were figures. Not people, but mannequins. At least a dozen, half-dressed, posed in attitudes of frozen, silent conviviality. One held a plastic cigarette. Another was draped over the pool's edge, seemingly immersed in the non-existent water. From the air, it was a profound, surreal still life of a party that died decades ago. I brought the drone lower. The details solidified, sun-cracked plastic skin, melted faces, old price tags clinging to limbs. The pool floor was chalk-colored dust, scattered with shoe prints. And that's when I saw the scuff marks, fresh ones. The sand around their feet was recently disturbed, the edges sharp. Not the work of the wind. Someone's been here. The air in the pool area was heavy, thick with heat and stillness. Up close, the figures were worse, sun-bleached eyes, mismatched limbs. One had a child-sized arm grafted onto an adult torso, a configuration of pure, bad dream. I knelt near the shallow end, touching a deep, recent footprint. I stood to get a wide shot, and then I heard a faint, deliberate plastic scrape behind me. I spun around. Nothing had changed. Or perhaps everything had, but too subtly, too quickly for my brain to process the difference. The wind, I heard myself whisper, a desperate laugh catching in my throat. I backed toward the car, eyes darting between the static figures and the drone monitor. Enough. I packed the controller, leaving the drone hovering as a source of acoustic cover. Then, just as I reached the car door, a longer, clearer scrape, plastic against concrete. I whipped my head back. Stillness. The circle of mannequins remained. Only the one sitting on the edge of the deep end was now leaning forward. Subtly. Significantly. The hair on my arms stood rigid. I scrambled into the car, locked the doors, and set the drone to autoland. I didn't wait. I drove. The moving shadow. Back in a cheap motel room, I dumped the footage, my hands still shaking. I tried to rationalize, nerves, heat, a trick of the light. But when I played the video, the rationale dissolved. At exactly 3 minutes in, the mannequin that had been facing away from the camera was now turned toward it. The sick, heavy feeling returned to my stomach. I scrolled forward. At 4 minutes, a faint shadow appeared by the pool office doorway. Humanoid. Not mannequin. Real enough to cast a moving shadow. The drone automatically adjusted focus. The shadow resolved into a figure. Someone standing just inside the doorway, still as the plastic forms, but heavier, more grounded. A slight movement of the shoulder, like a slow, deep breath. I zoomed until the pixels bled, but the outline of the hand was clear enough. I sat there, in that bland room, until the logic drained out of me. I deleted it all. Not because it was bad content, but because I did not want it to follow me. I told the story once, later, playing it off as weird desert art. Art students, someone suggested. A homeless guy, another said. Maybe. But I don't think they were all mannequins. Not all of them. If you ever find a drained pool full of figures that look a little too real, don't get closer. Don't assume they're props. Assume that they have been arranged, and that the arranger is still near. The unseen audience. The smell of sacrifice. It began with the terminal condition of youth, boredom, lubricated by cheap beer. The rumor of a cult barn down a gravel road was all the ignition we needed. You don't mention a cult on a Friday night and expect to stay home. There were 4 of us, myself, Zia, Kyle, and Mateo, the designated flashlight bearer. I was 24, unmoored, and prone to embracing bad ideas with potential. We drove beyond the outskirts of Kansas City, where the cell service frayed and died. The air was heavy with the scent of dirt and the slow death of summer. Zia's Civic rattled, the music fading into static. When Kyle pointed, we all saw it, a long, red hulk of a barn, slumped against the suffocating night. No house, no animals, just the barn and a desolate wind chime made of spoons that managed one sparse, metallic note whenever a breath of air shifted. The faded paint looked like dried blood in the headlights. No touching, no posting, Zia whispered. Scout's honor, I lied. The main door was not locked, only pushed shut. The interior air was a sick wave of wax, mold, and something cloyingly sweet, a smell of false sacrifice. The flashlight beam snagged on something white, dozens of candles, some new, some melted into pools of wax. Around them, crude chalk symbols, circles, lines, geometric nonsense. TikTok kids, I scoffed, forcing a casual tone. Fake ritual, fake scare. No one laughed. Then, a voice. Low and fuzzy, coming from the depths of the structure. We followed the sound to a small recorder sitting on an overturned crate, a red light blinking. The sound was a chanting, slow, rhythmic, echoing just enough to feel ubiquitous. Okay, Zia whispered, her voice tight. That's unsettling. Then the chanting changed. It wasn't random noise anymore. It began to pronounce names. We stared at each other, waiting for the joke to be revealed. Silence. Then, from the recorder, a soft, chilling burst of laughter. Matteo snapped his flashlight off, a useless gesture. "We're leaving." I nodded. We turned for the door. Something moved outside. Not the sound of walking, but the soft, scraping sound of someone shifting weight in the dirt. Then another, on the other side of the barn. A slow, perimetric circle was forming. The recorded chanting grew louder. "Turn that off," Kyle hissed. "I'm not touching it." The spoon wind chime gave its single, desolate clink. We ran. The door was strangely heavy, as if something invisible was pressing against it. When it finally gave, we spilled into the night. The Civic's headlights sliced across the field. And there they were. Shapes in the doorway. 5 of them. Motionless. Each holding up a phone, the small lenses aimed, recording us. "Are they filming?" Zia's voice was strained. "Just drive." Gravel sprayed as the Civic fishtailed onto the road. I twisted in my seat. One of the figures raised a hand, a gesture that looked like a slow, deliberate wave goodbye. The sleeve glinted red in the receding light. I didn't realize until later that the glinting sleeve looked exactly like my jacket, the one I had left somewhere inside. The surveillance of home. We didn't speak until we reached the bright, neon safety of a 24-hour taco joint. We sat against the same wall, trying to reduce the event to a shared, funny anecdote. Kids with a really good sense of timing, I managed. The laughter was forced. By the time I reached my apartment, the whole night felt like a fevered unreality. I locked the door, climbed into bed, and savored the silence. At 7:13 a.m. my phone vibrated. A new video. No sender, just a file sitting in my gallery. I opened it without thinking. It was me sleeping. The video was shot through my bedroom window, directly above my head. I could see the shallow movement of my chest, my hair across the pillow, the blanket half off. The clip lasted 20 seconds. At second 15, a patch of red fabric, the sleeve of my jacket, crept into the lower corner of the frame. My hands shook violently. I texted the group. "Did any of you get a weird video?" Zia, "No." "What video?" I called the police. The officer was polite, convinced he was dealing with a prank. He asked if I'd given anyone a spare key. He filed a report, suggested a security camera, and left. I spent the day frantically changing passwords and setting up motion lights. That night, I backed up the video, then deleted it from my phone. The folder on my laptop, I labeled, "Do not open." I tried to believe it was a random stalker. An explanation that kept the world stable. Then Zia texted, suggesting we go back, in the daytime. I said no. 5 minutes later, I said yes. When we arrived, the barn was gone. Nothing remained but a blackened patch of earth and a line of caution tape. A county notice on a post, "Unsafe structure. Emergency demolition." Dated 2 days after our trespass. "Guess they cleaned up the cult," Zia said. We stood there, waiting for the air to feel normal. It didn't. Now, when I tell the story, I tell the short version. We broke into a barn. We thought it was fake. It wasn't. They laugh. So, it was a cult. Maybe, I say. But the video didn't feel like a prank. We broke in, yes. But that's not what haunts me. It's the chilling, definitive certainty that whatever we found in that barn, whatever was watching, knew where to find us when the fun was over. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.